right, let's bring David Elsley back on the stream. There he is, once again, President and CEO of Cardiol Therapeutics. David, long time no see.
Yes, nice to be back.
Good to have you back. We have your slides here, guys. Let's bring them up on the screen. There they are. David, I'm going to let you go more in depth on Cardiol, and I will see myself out of here.
That's great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce you to the work we're doing at Cardiol Therapeutics, where we are a heart failure focused company. We're developing anti-inflammatory strategies for heart failure medicine. This is an area the Cardiol Therapeutics team has worked in now for over 30 years. I'm the founder, CEO, and largest shareholder of Cardiol. Before we get started, I'd just like to draw everyone's attention to our forward-looking statement, which forms part of this presentation today. So Cardiol combines extraordinary talent with respect to the development of important heart failure medicines. This is an area the team at Cardiol Therapeutics, the leadership team, our advisors, and our research collaborators has worked in now for several decades. We have a strong scientific rationale behind the properties that we are developing here at Cardiol. We have advanced clinical programs. We have a phase 2/3 program now enrolling patients in the United States, and we have a recently approved IND for a second important program in cardiac inflammation addressable to an orphan drug eligible indication, acute myocarditis. And then we have a pipeline which is developing new innovations, new ways to target chronic heart failure, which is arguably one of the largest medical problems facing the developed world today, affecting some 26 million people in the developed world and remaining a leading cause of death and disability throughout the world. And we've developed a very strong intellectual property portfolio over the past several years, which will protect all the developments that we are working on. Really, the genesis of Cardiol Therapeutics was a discovery made at the National Institute of Health that was published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology that basically demonstrated the ability of the cannabidiol molecule to reverse fibrosis and inflammation in a model of diabetic cardiomyopathy. Now, this is important because diabetes plays a role or is an underlying risk factor in the majority of patients that suffer heart failure or develop heart failure. We now have 3 important programs. We have a phase 2/3 program, which is really a gateway study to study the cardioprotective properties of our lead formulation or our lead drug candidate, Cardiol RX, in patients who are at very high risk for mortality to the extent that they become COVID positive because they have a prior history of cardiovascular disease. I'll describe that program, but here we're not looking at the impact on COVID. We're looking at the impact on inflammation caused by the immune response to COVID in cardiac patients. We've also had just recently an IND cleared by the FDA for a very important program in acute myocarditis, which remains the leading cause of sudden cardiac death in young people or people under the age of 30. And then we have a new program that we're embarking upon with a new formulation of our lead drug candidate addressable to heart failure, which remains the leading cause of hospital admissions in the United States and drives about $30 billion in healthcare expenditures. Our lead drug candidate is an oral formulation. This is manufactured to the highest standards of the pharmaceutical industry, which are GMP. Importantly, we make our formulations pharmaceutically to ensure product purity, consistency, and stability. And the properties of this molecule that are important in the cardiac setting is the demonstration across now many labs around the world, widely published on, the ability of this molecule to reduce inflammation and improve endothelial dysfunction in models of cardiac inflammation, to reduce important inflammatory cytokines that are elevated in the heart failure state, to reduce key markers of cardiac injury, such as troponin T, improve cardiac function, and data that we had accepted for presentation at the American College of Cardiology concerning the ability to ameliorate the fibrotic process in the heart muscle in a model of non-ischemic cardiomyopathy. On the basis of all of these findings, we've assembled an international panel of key opinion leaders in heart failure medicine. These are specialists in myocarditis, heart disease in general, heart failure, cardiac transplantation, cardiotoxicology. They represent major centers from the United States, Canada, and Europe. And it is this independent panel that has overseen the development and design of all of our clinical studies at Cardiol, the most significant of which is the Lancer trial. This is a phase 2/3 program that is now enrolling patients in the United States who are at particularly elevated risk for mortality and morbidity in the COVID setting because of their history or risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And the first demonstration or realization of this elevated risk factor was published in JAMA Cardiology in March of 2020. And here we have a Kaplan-Meier survival curve, whereas you can see out about 25 days, patients with a prior history of cardiac injury or risk factors for cardiovascular disease, to the extent that they become COVID positive and are hospitalized, their mortality rates are approximately 50% or greater versus the general population, which has mortality rate or survival rates over 98, 99%. We believe this cardiovascular history makes these patients particularly vulnerable. And so we designed a study that was designed by the Independent Steering Committee that was presented to the Cardiorenal Panel of the Food and Drug Administration. And we secured an IND clearance to initiate a very important cardioprotection study in this high-risk population. So this trial is designed to enroll 422 patients. It's 1-to-1 randomization, so it's placebo-controlled. We're enrolling patients who have a prior history of cardiovascular disease or risk factors for cardiovascular disease, such as hypertension or diabetes. And the primary efficacy endpoints here are studying the impact of this drug on risk of mortality, progression to ICU, a requirement for ventilatory support, or risk of one of the major cardiovascular complications, such as heart attack or stroke. We're dose ranging patients up to 15 mg per kilo, and they'll receive 28 days of treatment with a 30-day follow-up thereafter. This study is designed to complete randomization later this year or early next year, and then we would expect it to report shortly thereafter. Worldwide Clinical Trials has been appointed CRO we're working with in collaboration with our medical affairs team. Worldwide Clinical Trials has extensive experience in executing trials in the cardiac-focused area, but also they've had significant experience in operating clinical trials in the COVID environment as well. Running in parallel with this program is a recently cleared IND initiative in acute myocarditis, which is a particularly devastating form of heart muscle inflammation because it remains, it's really a disease of young folks. So this remains the leading cause of sudden cardiac death in people under the age of 35. It is typically or substantially caused or most often caused by a viral infection. Historically, we can think of the influenza virus, but now myocarditis is being described as a complication of the COVID virus. It's a rare consequence of mRNA vaccine strategies in the COVID setting. And it's also secondary to certain of the oncology treatments, such as checkpoint inhibitors. This can lead to fulminant heart failure in young, healthy adults, can necessitate lengthy ICU stays, and in advanced cases can necessitate cardiac transplantation. Importantly, this indication is eligible for orphan drug designation. This is the same pathway by which the first cannabidiol-based oral medicine was fast-tracked and approved in the pediatric epilepsy setting. And in the context of acute myocarditis, the prevalence is about twice that of the rare epilepsies. And in fact, with the new causative factors for myocarditis, the prevalence may well be much higher than that currently. The orphan drug program really incentivizes the pharmaceutical industry to develop new therapies for rare conditions by providing periods of prolonged market exclusivity post-approval, as well as a more accelerated development pathway. And the reason we selected myocarditis as an orphan drug candidate target is basically demonstrated on this slide or illustrated on this slide. This is an experimental model of autoimmune myocarditis. On the left, you see normal healthy heart tissue. In the center panel, you see fibrosis secondary to myocarditis. And then on the right, you see in the presence of the myocarditis pathology or the myocarditis process with concomitant treatment of cannabidiol, the tissue of the heart is substantially preserved. We believe this is quite striking and indicative or a signal that this could represent an entirely new way to protect these patients with myocarditis for which there is currently no recognized standard of care. To enable initiation of this program in acute myocarditis, Cardiol completed one of the largest healthy adult trials, understanding that most of the cannabidiol clinical experience historically was in children because it was first developed for the rare pediatric epilepsies. Cardiol executed a 52-patient adult study in patients age ranging 23 to 60. They were dosed up to 30 mg per kilo, which is relatively high. And even at that high dose level, we do not see any abnormalities in laboratory findings, no change in liver enzymes, and most importantly, no change in the electrophysiology in these patients or their QT intervals, which is critically important because the patients we're studying are at elevated risk for electrophysiological disturbances in their heart. And on the basis of the findings of the phase 1 trial, which were filed with the FDA, Cardiol has recently announced clearance of our second IND to initiate a program in this important area of acute myocarditis, which is a devastating form of heart inflammation. There is no current standard of care. And here we are using 3 co-primary endpoints with high precision measurement of MRI to measure ejection fraction, extracellular volume, and global longitudinal strain, or improvements in these endpoints, which are recognized as the key diagnostic measures for diagnosis and improvement in this indication. So this study is designed to randomize or enroll 100 patients, again, 1-to-1 randomization at 15 to 20 centers in Canada, the United States, and Europe. And we expect to have this study up and running in the 4th quarter. So that's our focus on the acute inflammatory innovations. So we have an oral, high-dose prescription strength, oral formulation addressable in the acute phase of disease. But we also have a very important program in the chronic condition of heart failure, which we look forward to taking into clinical development shortly. This heart failure by any measure is a major medical problem. It affects 6 million people in Canada, the United States, up to 26 million people in the developed world. A very high mortality rate at 30% within a year and 50% within 5 years. And these patients are at high risk for frequent hospitalizations. And in the United States alone, that drives about $30 billion in healthcare expenditures. Approximately half of all heart failure is diastolic heart failure, or heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, where you get a thickening in the ventricle muscle secondary to fibrosis and inflammation, which basically inhibits the ability of the heart to relax normally. So the heart doesn't fill properly. So it doesn't have sufficient blood or oxygenated blood to meet metabolic demand. Patients suffer a devastating reduction in quality of life, poor exercise tolerance. They're frequently hospitalized and have a markedly elevated risk for mortality. We worked with the world-renowned DeBakey Heart Transplant Center for the past several years. This is home of really some of the greatest research being conducted in heart failure medicine today. And with this collaboration, we've developed what we believe to be an entirely new way to deliver this molecule, which is a subcutaneous formulation. So here we'd be delivering the drug much like insulin, where we can go directly into the systemic circulation so we can more efficiently concentrate the drug at sites of disease. And the first evidence of this potentially, or this improved efficiency through this route of administration were accepted for presentation at the American College of Cardiology sessions in 2020. And here we're looking at a model of non-ischemic heart failure and the impact of subcutaneously administered cannabidiol formulation on BNP, which is a key marker of cardiac stretch. It's elevated in heart failure patients. And here we see at 10 mg per kilo of cannabidiol, which is the known therapeutic dose approved by the FDA for the maintenance dosing for the epilepsy setting, this dosing reduced BNP. But more striking, when we went to 1/10 of that dose, or 1 mg per kilo, we still reduced BNP. So we believe this is indicative of an improved way to deliver this form of drug, to get more drug concentrated at sites of pathology so we can achieve therapeutic effect with less drug. We also observe this at the pathology level as well. On the left, you see normal cardiac tissue. One panel in, you see hypertension-induced fibrosis. Basically, we induce hypertension in this model system, so the heart pumps against vascular resistance of high blood pressure. Fibrosis, the heart becomes fibrotic and inflamed, and then we stain for the fibrotic lesions. So you can see one panel in, the bluish staining is fibrosis. But in the presence of this angiotensin-induced cardiomyopathy, at 10 mg per kilo and again at 1 mg per kilo, we ameliorate this fibrotic process. We believe this is a signal of an entirely new way to target one of the key pathological processes in the development of diastolic heart failure, which is one of the largest medical markets in the world today. So the key milestones we've set for our organization in the coming quarter to 3 quarters is to complete randomization or complete enrollment in the Lancer study, these high-risk cardiac patients. We believe that COVID is going to become endemic, as many are saying now, and it's going to be of paramount importance to be able to protect the most vulnerable patient population. So we look forward to completing and reporting the Lancer trial in Q1. We look forward to initiating enrollment in this very important program in acute myocarditis, which is orphan drug eligible and a condition for which there is no recognized standard of care. And we look forward to completing the development of our subcutaneous formulation and moving it into an IND enabling program to enable entry into the clinic in first half of 2022 with a clinical target of heart failure. I'd welcome you to visit cardiolrx.com for the biographies on our entire management team. Just some brief remarks. We have extraordinary talent with this team that has been involved in the development of important therapeutics now for over 30 years. Dr. Andrew Hammer is our Chief Medical Officer, 20 years of heart failure medicine practice, trained under the world-renowned Harvey White as a clinical trialist, ran over 40 clinical trials, and then joined Amgen, where he was part of the cardiometabolic program and was head of the Repatha program, which is $1 billion drug. Chris Waddick, over 30 years of senior financial roles in life, majority of which was in life sciences. Dr. Andrea Parker, extraordinary talent in execution of clinical trials in heart failure medicine and former chief scientific officer of the Peter Munk Cardiac Center. Bernard Lim has been in the biotech industry and life sciences industry his entire career, spanning 3 decades with expertise in operations, manufacturing, scale-up, quality systems implementation, and extraordinary talent also with Ann Tomlin on the regulatory front, having taken several drugs through regulatory bodies around the world, predominantly FDA. We have an international board, independent, chaired by Dr. Guillermo Torriamioni, a world-renowned cardiologist, immunologist, trained under Dr. DeBakey and head of one of the largest heart transplant services in the United States. Ian Chalmers brings commercialization expertise from regulated industries. Colin Stote was one of the early employees of GW Pharma. He joined that organization in the year 2000 and was part of the team that developed cannabidiol, the first FDA-approved medicine for the epilepsies. Peter Picos is a veteran of the pharmaceutical industry, owner, founder, and CEO of Dalton Pharmaceuticals. He founded that company in 1987, and they're our global partner for all of our formulation manufacturing. And our most recent addition to the board brings extensive experience in the life sciences industry, as well as legal acumen and a very accomplished financial acumen to the board in Michael Wilner. We've recently uplisted on the NASDAQ, so we are now a dual stock exchange listed company. Cap structure well represented by insiders with 16%. I'm the largest shareholder and the founding shareholder of this organization. Our pharmaceutical and research collaborators are also represented on the cap table at 6%. A strong cash position at the end of Q2 with $33 million in cash. We also have in-the-money warrants, which could trigger additional inflows of up to $20 million. So we're very comfortable with our cash position, no debt, no long-term obligations, and we have sufficient capital resources to execute across all of the milestones that we have discussed today. So with that, I would like to thank everyone very much for their attention today. It's been a great opportunity to present the Cardiol story, and we look forward to keeping everyone updated on our progress in the coming quarters.
Thank you, David. David Elsley, the CEO of Cardiol Therapeutics. There's the URL up on the screen. David, thank you so much for joining us today at the Benzinga Small Cap Healthcare Conference.